It started on a Thursday afternoon when I decided to clean my husband's SUV. Nothing dramatic. Just one of those regular days when you're bored enough to vacuum the floor mats and check between the seats for old receipts. I wasn't looking for anything, but that's how real trouble usually begins when you're not looking. I reached under the passenger seat and pulled out a folded piece of paper covered in bright crayon marks. It was one of those drawings kids make in kindergarten stick figures, a house, a lopsided sun, and right there in the middle, in big shaky letters, it said, "I love you, Daddy." For a second, I just stared at it, trying to process what I was holding. It smelled faintly, like apple juice and crayon wax, exactly how a kid's backpack smells. The paper had been folded and tucked perfectly, like someone wanted to hide it but not lose it. The thing is, my husband and I don't have kids. We decided years ago we were fine with that. Or at least, I thought it was a decision we made together. Right then, I heard the garage door open. Evan pulled in, phone in hand, still talking to someone from work. He smiled when he saw me cleaning the car, like I was the good, supportive wife keeping things in order. Then he froze. His eyes went straight to the piece of paper in my hand. He didn't say anything at first. Just this weird silence. His face lost all color. You know when people say someone turned white? It's not just an expression. I saw it happen. His jaw tightened. His voice cracked a little when he finally spoke. "That's from a client's kid," he said too fast. "You remember the Henderson project in Madison? The client's little girl drew that. Must have fallen out of my bag." I just smiled, folded the paper, and said, "Cute. She must really like you." He gave this nervous laugh. "Yeah, kids love me. Guess I have that energy." That was a lie. Evan doesn't even like being around other people's kids. He once told me our neighbor's toddler looked like a tiny drunk person. But I didn't argue. I've been a journalist long enough to know when to stop talking and start observing. I put the drawing on the counter, washed my hands, and said, "Dinner's at 7. I'm making your favorite." He looked surprised, maybe relieved. "Chicken piccata?" "Exactly," I said. He smiled, kissed my cheek, and walked inside like nothing had happened. But I saw his reflection in the kitchen window. He looked back at that folded paper on the counter like it was a bomb about to go off. While he showered, I unfolded it again. At the bottom corner, in uneven blue crayon, it said, "Love, Emma, 5 years old." I stood there doing mental math. 5 years old. We'd been married for 8. Evan had been going to Madison for work trips for 6. It didn't take a genius to connect the dots. Still, part of me didn't want to believe it. You know that quiet voice that says, "There must be another explanation?" I wanted to listen to it. I really did. That night, during dinner, he acted perfectly normal, talking about building permits and zoning deadlines, like the guy hadn't just been caught holding a loaded lie. I nodded, smiled, played my part. Every marriage has its performance moments. That was mine. He checked his phone twice between bites. I noticed a saved text draft pop up on the lock screen. Just one word visible: "Sorry." I pretended not to see it. When dinner was over, he kissed my forehead and said he had emails to finish. I poured myself a glass of wine and looked at the drawing again. There it was, the proof I didn't ask for. A 5-year-old girl who called my husband Daddy. I didn't cry. I didn't throw things. I just sat there, tracing the shaky lines of a child's handwriting with my thumb, and thought about how strange it is that something so small, a single piece of paper, can rip the floor out from under your entire life. People always ask later, "Did you know?" And the truth is, you always feel it before you know it. There are little signs, like crumbs on a trail. You just keep sweeping them away until one of them cuts your hand. That night, while Evan slept next to me, I opened my laptop and started a new document. Not for an article, not for work, just for me. The title at the top said, "Things That Don't Add Up." Underneath, I wrote, 1. Drawing found in car. 2. Emma, age 5. 3. Madison trips every 2 weeks. 4. Always leaves Friday, returns Sunday night. 5. Nervous reaction when confronted. By the time I finished, it was nearly 1 a.m. The list was short but heavy. I stared at it, took a sip of wine, and closed the laptop. Sometimes, revenge doesn't start with anger. It starts with curiosity. And I had a lot of questions. If you've ever seen something that didn't make sense and felt that sinking feeling in your gut, tell me in the comments. I actually read what people write, and I'm curious if anyone else has had that moment when reality starts to crack. And if you like real cheating stories and true revenge stories that actually feel real, don't forget to subscribe. Things are about to get interesting. Evan's alarm went off at 6 the next morning, and he left early for another site visit. I watched his car disappear down the street, the empty space he left behind feeling a little too quiet. The drawing was still on the counter, right where I left it. I folded it again, slipped it into my purse, and thought maybe it's time to find out who Emma really is. The next morning, the air felt heavier than usual, like the house itself knew something was off. The coffee smelled the same, the floor creaked the same, but nothing actually felt the same. I sat by the kitchen window, watching Evan's taillights disappear down the street, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't text him my usual, "Drive safe." Instead, I opened my laptop again. The document titled, "Things That Don't Add Up," blinked at me from the screen, like it was waiting for more. I added another line. 6. Always, too tired, to talk after trips. 7. New password on his phone. Wheat. Smells different lately. I'm not the kind of person who snoops for fun. I've written investigative pieces for work, but digging into your own marriage feels disgusting in a way I can't even describe. Still, curiosity is a stubborn thing. Once it wakes up, it doesn't go back to sleep. By noon, I decided to check his travel calendar. Evan's company sends automatic confirmations to his work email, which conveniently syncs with our shared tablet. Every Madison site visit followed the same pattern. Leave Friday morning, return Sunday night twice a month for 5 years straight. 5 years? That's not a project. That's a second life. I told myself, maybe I was overreacting. Maybe there was some weird explanation, like a long-term renovation job or consulting deal. But even as I thought it, I didn't believe it. The lie was too neat, too perfectly rehearsed. That evening, when he came home, I asked casually, "How's Madison?" He looked up from his laptop, a little startled. "What do you mean?" "Your project's there. You've been going for years. It must feel like a second home." He smiled, maybe too quickly. "Yeah, kind of. Small city, nice people." Then he changed the subject just like that, asking about dinner, the weather, my deadlines. But he didn't ask why I brought it up. That told me everything I needed to know. Later that week, I did something I hadn't done in years. I checked our joint bank account. Evan handles most of the bills, so I rarely look. The first thing I noticed were hotel charges, restaurants in Madison, and a few toy store purchases. Toys. One of them from a boutique called Little Acorn Playthings. I clicked through the transaction details, and for a second, I just stared at the amount $79. $50 for a wooden dollhouse set. I remembered the crayon drawing, the stick figure house. The connection hit like a punch. When he came home that night, I didn't ask about it. I didn't ask about anything. I just watched him move through the house, same routine as always. Loosen tie, grab a drink, complain about traffic. Everything perfectly normal, except it wasn't. He talked about a new colleague named Caroline, mentioned her twice, like he wanted me to know the name, just enough to make it sound innocent. "She's from the Madison office," he said. "Really sharp designer. Saved us a lot of trouble with permits." I nodded, acting impressed, while quietly filing that name away like evidence. The next day, while he was at work, I opened his briefcase. Inside were blueprints, invoices, and one envelope from Hensley Interiors. My heart skipped. The logo was small, but clear. I flipped through the paper's project proposals, material lists, and there it was, at the bottom of the page. Lead designer, Caroline Hensley. I didn't take anything. I didn't even take photos. I just put everything back exactly how I found it. But I couldn't unsee that name. That night, while we ate dinner, I asked, "You ever work with Hensley Interiors before?" He froze for a fraction of a second. Yeah. Why?" "I saw their name on a magazine cover. Nice designs." He smiled too wide. Oh yeah, Caroline's great. Real professional. Professional. Sure. That's what they all say. After dinner, I loaded the dishwasher while he scrolled through his phone at the counter. He laughed at something on the screen, just a quick, private laugh, and turned it face down when I looked over. I said nothing, but my stomach turned in that slow, creeping way you get before a storm. I didn't need dramatic proof anymore. I already had it. The drawing, the trips, the hotel bills, the toys, the new perfume clinging to his jacket. Each piece might mean nothing alone, but together, they screamed one story loud enough to drown out everything else. I went to bed early, pretending to be tired. He stayed up late, finishing reports. I could hear him typing from the other room, but I could also hear the small vibration of his phone on the table every few minutes. Messages. He didn't even bother to silence them anymore. At 11:47 p.m., he came to bed, smelling faintly of cologne he didn't wear before. I kept my breathing steady, eyes closed. He whispered, "You asleep?" And when I didn't answer, he exhaled in relief. Then he turned away, facing the wall. That's when I realized something important. This wasn't the first time he lied, just the first time I caught the scent of it. And once you smell a lie, you can't unsmell it. The next morning, he left early again. I waited until I heard the garage door close, then opened my laptop. New line added. 9. Caroline Hensley, designer in Madison. 10. Hotel receipts plus toy store purchase. I stared at the list until the words blurred. Something about seeing it written down made it all too real, but instead of breaking down, I laughed. It wasn't the happy kind, it was the tired kind. The kind that comes from realizing the life you're living might be somebody else's cover story. I grabbed my coat and purse, locked the door behind me, and drove downtown. If I was going to find out the truth, I needed someone who knew how to follow lies for a living. The parking lot outside Marcus Tate's office was half empty. He used to be a cop before becoming a private investigator. He owed me a favor after I helped expose a city inspector scandal 2 years ago. I figured this was a good time to cash it in. When I stepped into his office, he looked up from his coffee, smirked, and said, "You only show up when someone's in trouble." I smiled back, sliding the folded crayon drawing across his desk. "Then you're about to make rent," I said. Marcus picked up the crayon drawing and looked at it like it was a crime scene photo. He had that dry, unimpressed expression he always used when something smelled bad, but he hadn't figured out what yet. He asked, "So, what am I looking at here? A kid's doodle or a smoking gun?" "Maybe both," I said, sitting down across from him. "The problem is, it doesn't belong in my husband's car. We don't have kids." He raised an eyebrow. "That'll do it." I gave him the rest: the trips to Madison, the hotel receipts, the toy store purchase, the woman's name, Caroline Hensley. He didn't interrupt once, just took notes with a pencil, tapping the eraser like a metronome. When I finished, he nodded slowly. "All right. I'll run a quiet check on her. I can pull business records, address, phone, social media, the usual. Give me a few days." "Marcus," I said, leaning forward, "if there's a kid involved, I need to know the truth. No assumptions, just proof." "Got it." He looked at me for a second longer than necessary, then said, "You're not going to do anything stupid, right?" I smiled. "You know me. I don't do stupid. I do accurate." I left his office and drove back through downtown Chicago. The buildings blurred past, and for the first time, I noticed how every window reflected something different. Maybe that's what a double life really was. Just reflections, depending on where you're standing. That night, Evan was in an unusually good mood. He came home early, brought Thai food, opened wine, and started talking about maybe taking a weekend trip, just us. The timing was almost funny. He said, "You've been quiet lately. Everything okay?" I smiled. "Yeah, just tired of the city noise." He reached for my hand. "Then maybe we need a break, somewhere quiet. The lake house, maybe?" "Maybe," I said, sipping my wine. "But you've got that Madison project, don't you?" He froze for half a beat before laughing it off. "Yeah, but it can wait. You come first." It was a good performance. I almost clapped. The next morning, he left early again, suitcase in hand. Site inspection, he said, kissing my cheek. I smiled, waved, and waited until his car disappeared before grabbing my phone. Marcus had texted, "Got something. Meet me." When I got to his office, he had a folder waiting on his desk. No small talk this time. He opened it and started reading like a doctor giving a diagnosis. Caroline Hensley, 33, interior designer, works out of Madison, no criminal record, divorced once, one child Emma, age 5, father listed as not disclosed. I didn't say anything. I just nodded for him to keep going. He turned a page. Evan Pierce, your husband has been renting a furnished apartment in Madison under his own name. Lease started 6 years ago. I've got bank transfers, credit card statements, and a couple of photos. He slid a few across the desk. My throat tightened when I saw them. Evan in jeans and a t-shirt, standing outside a small brick building, holding a little girl with curly brown hair. She had her arms around his neck. He looked relaxed. Happy. Like the man I used to know, only, softer. I picked up the photo, looked closer. The girl was the same age as the one who signed the drawing, Emma. My voice came out quiet. Does she know? Marcus frowned. Caroline? Probably not. She's got no clue he's married. Everything I've seen says she thinks she's with a single guy. He's been splitting time between you two. 2 full lives, 1 lie. I sat there, still holding the photo, feeling the weight of it. You'd think anger would be the first thing to hit, but it wasn't. It was clarity. Like the fog had finally lifted, and what was left wasn't mystery anymore, it was math. Lies always add up eventually. Marcus slid another sheet over. There's one more thing. He's claiming Emma as a dependent on his taxes. I blinked. Using my name? You're joint filing. You've basically been subsidizing his secret kid for years. I laughed, then quiet, dry, humorless. Of course I have. Why stop at betrayal when you can add tax fraud? Marcus closed the folder. So, what do you want to do with all this? I looked at him. I'm not sure yet. But whatever it is, it'll be smart. And final. He nodded. You want copies? Every single one. Back in my car, I spread the photos on the passenger seat. Evan, Caroline, and Emma. A perfect little family in broad daylight. No shadows, no shame. It almost felt insulting how simple it was. That night, I waited for him to come home. He walked in around 8, tired, pretending not to notice the exhaustion on my face. He kissed me, said something about long drive, and asked if I'd eaten. I said yes. He talked about traffic, meetings, clients, every word a layer of wallpaper over the rot underneath. He asked, You okay? You seem off. I said, Just a lot on my mind. He smiled, half concerned, half distracted. Don't overthink stuff. Everything's fine. Everything's fine. People say that like a prayer when they know it isn't. I poured him a glass of wine, handed it over, and watched him take a sip like nothing in the world was about to collapse. I didn't confront him. Not yet. Because the thing about truth, it's like a weapon. Useless if you swing it too soon. After he went to bed, I sat at my desk and looked through the photos again. My laptop screen reflected my face next to theirs, and for a moment, it looked like we were all in the same picture. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just thought about how many women never get this kind of clarity. Most spend years wondering, doubting, gaslighting themselves into silence. But now, I had proof cold, solid, undeniable. I saved the photos in a new folder titled Evidence, printed one copy, and tucked it into the back of my notebook. Next to it, I wrote one sentence. If he built 2 lives, one of them is coming down. I closed the notebook, turned off the light, and went to bed before dawn. Evan was still asleep, his phone buzzing on the nightstand. I watched him roll over, mumbling something in his dream, and for a brief second, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Because the truth was, he had no idea that by morning, I already knew everything he'd tried to hide. When I woke up that morning, the house felt different, like every sound had a new meaning. The coffee maker hissed, the fridge hummed, and somewhere down the hall my husband was humming to himself in the shower. I stood there in the kitchen, staring at the man I'd shared a bed with for 8 years, and wondered how many of those years had actually been real. He walked in wearing a towel, hair dripping, kissed my forehead, and said, "Morning, babe." I smiled back. "Morning." He poured coffee, scrolling through his phone, completely at ease. The same man who held another woman's child and called her Emma. It's strange watching someone lie to you without realizing you know. Every gesture, every casual word becomes a performance. He asked if I needed anything from Madison since he was heading there again next weekend. I said, "Just bring me honesty." He laughed, assuming it was sarcasm. After he left, I sat down at my desk and spread everything Marcus had given me across the table. Receipts, photos, bank statements, it looked like a case file. My own private exposé. I'd covered corporate fraud before, but this was different. This was personal, embezzlement, emotional, financial, moral. The photos were ordinary enough. Evan at a farmer's market, carrying groceries with Caroline beside him, her hand brushing his arm. One of him helping Emma ride a pink bike, smiling like a man who'd finally found peace. I studied his face and realized I hadn't seen him smile like that in years. It wasn't rage that hit me. It was humiliation. The kind that seeps under your skin and makes you question your entire judgment. I had built a life with this man. Trusted him. Defended him when friends called him distant. Turns out, he wasn't distant, he was busy. Busy living two lives. At noon, I called Marcus. "You said the apartment lease was in his name?" "Yeah," he said. "Want the address?" "I already have it. I just wanted to hear you confirm it." I spent the afternoon reading through the rest of the documents. That's when I found it, the tax forms. Evan had listed Emma Pierce as a dependent under our joint return. The ink hadn't even fully dried on last year's signature. My name, right there, helping fund his secret family. I leaned back in my chair and let out a dry laugh. So that's how he afforded that Lakeview apartment. By evening, I had memorized every lie, every number, every name. I didn't cry, and I didn't text him. Instead, I opened my notebook and drew 2 columns. Life 1. Chicago. Me, our house, our friends, his job. Life 2. Madison. Caroline, the apartment, the kid. Then I started listing connections between the 2 shared cards, overlapping dates, the days he came home too tired to talk. Patterns don't lie, people do. Around 6, Evan called. "Hey, you okay? You sound quiet." "I'm fine," I said, watching the steam rise from my coffee. "Just thinking about taxes." He chuckled. "You're the only person I know who worries about that in May. Guess I like to stay ahead. Or not." After dinner, I sat on the couch scrolling through Caroline's design firm website. She looked normal, polished, friendly smile, decent reviews. A woman who probably thought she'd finally found someone dependable. The irony burned. Her portfolio had photos of apartment interiors, including one that looked suspiciously familiar, the same sofa Evan had shown me months ago, saying it was a client's space. Now I realized I'd been complimenting the other woman's living room. That was the moment something in me shifted. The shock was gone, replaced by a cold, focused clarity. I wasn't going to scream or throw his things on the lawn like some reality show wife. That's not justice. That's noise. And I was aiming for precision. I started researching upcoming events in his industry. Awards, conferences, anything public. That's when I found it. Chicago Civil Engineers Association Gala, June 24. Evan Pierce listed as a top nominee for Engineer of the Year. Perfect. Public recognition built on private lies. The next morning, he came into the kitchen whistling, all cheerful, kissing my cheek like a man with no ghosts. "Big week coming up," he said. "You'll come to the gala, right?" "I want you there when I win." I smiled. "Of course. Wouldn't miss it." He grinned, kissed me again, and walked out, completely unaware that the woman standing in front of him already had his entire secret life printed in a folder labeled Exhibit A. I spent the next few days functioning like normal, which was easier than I expected. Once you stop believing the lie, pretending becomes effortless. I cooked, cleaned, laughed at his stories, even helped him pick a tie for his big night. He thanked me for being his rock. I almost said, "You'll need one to hide under soon." Instead, I said, "You deserve it." And oh, that night, when he was asleep, I packed a small box with the Essentials USB drive, copies of his bank records, tax returns, photos of him with Emma. I sealed it, labeled it, insurance, and tucked it behind my old writing awards in the closet. Then I sat at the dining table, looking at the framed wedding photo hanging on the wall. He looked younger, softer. I looked happy. People always say photos capture memories, but they don't. They capture illusions frozen just before they break. I poured myself another glass of wine and whispered, "Congratulations, Evan. You built 2 houses. Now let's see which one falls first." The next day, I went to work like nothing happened. I wrote copy, attended meetings, laughed at office jokes. But every time my phone buzzed, I imagined it was Marcus calling again with another piece of the puzzle. At lunch, I walked outside, stood by the riverwalk, and watched a family of 3 feeding ducks. The little girl squealed when one nipped her finger, and the father laughed, scooping her up. I watched them for a moment longer than I should have, then turned away. By the time I got back to my desk, the decision was already made. I wasn't going to leave quietly. I wasn't going to warn him. I was going to let the truth do the talking publicly, precisely, and in a way he'd never recover from. When Evan texted that evening, "Love you, can't wait for next week," I smiled and typed back, "Me too." Then I closed my phone and added a new title to my notebook. Phase 2. The plan. The hardest part of revenge isn't the planning, it's pretending nothing's wrong while you plan it. Pretending to love someone while you quietly dismantle their entire second life takes patience. Luckily, patience is something journalists are trained for. I started simple. First, I needed information. Evan's gala was in less than 2 weeks, and if I wanted this to mean something, it had to happen there. Public, clean, impossible to deny. At work, I spent my lunch breaks not scrolling social media, but researching the guest list and event sponsors. The Chicago Civil Engineers Association published everything: online names, seating charts, even the PR contact handling invitations. His company, Pierce & Langford Construction, was sponsoring one of the tables. That meant Evan would be in the spotlight. I called Marcus. "You ever crashed a gala before?" I asked. He laughed. "I've tailed city officials through worse. What's the angle?" "I don't want dirt. I already have that. I want coordination. Timing." "Meaning?" "I want him exposed in a room full of his peers. I need a way to get the right people there at the right time." He whistled softly. "You're going big. Why go small?" We agreed on a strategy. No shouting match, no confrontation, no threats. I'd let his lies speak for themselves, surrounded by the people who once respected him. That evening, Evan came home bragging about his upcoming award. He said, "You'll need a new dress for the gala, something that stands out." "Oh, I plan on standing out," I said, and he grinned, not hearing the irony. While he watched TV, I sat beside him, pretending to scroll my phone while secretly drafting an email on my laptop. The message was short and polite, sent from an alias I created using a burner account. Subject: Invitation update for the Chicago Engineers Gala. Dear Miss Hensley, Mr. Evan Pierce requested that his Madison team be included in the event to celebrate their collaboration on the lakefront redevelopment project. Family guests are welcome. Warm regards, Sandra Miller, Administrative Liaison, Chicago Civil Engineers Association. I attached a real event logo, found from their website. It looked official enough. Caroline replied less than an hour later. "Thank you, Sandra. Evan didn't tell us about this. What a lovely surprise. My daughter Emma will be thrilled." I sat back in my chair, heart pounding not from guilt, but from how easily it worked. Evan, meanwhile, was laughing at some show on TV, sipping whiskey like a man without a care in the world. The same man who'd created a family in another city and still had the nerve to call me his rock. The next few days were about details. I arranged for Marcus to attend the gala as event security. He still had connections with local contractors and could easily blend in. I'd give him the cue when it was time to roll the footage. Footage, yes. Because printed evidence is powerful, but video makes it unforgettable. I asked Marcus if he could compile everything: photos, financial records, tax filings into a short, professional presentation. No commentary, just facts. Think of it like a corporate audit, I told him. He smirked. With emotional consequences. Exactly. Oh. On Friday, Evan surprised me with flowers. For putting up with me during award season, he said. Ah, you're not so bad, I replied, smiling like the world's most loyal wife. That weekend, while he was meeting a client, I drove out to Madison. I parked 3 blocks away from the address Marcus had given me the apartment Evan rented. It was smaller than I expected, a red brick building with hanging plants in the windows. Cozy, domestic. Through the blinds, I saw movement Caroline in a light sweater, brushing Emma's hair. A tiny backpack sat on the couch. The scene was painfully ordinary. I didn't hate them. In some twisted way, I envied them. They were living the honest version of the lie I was stuck in. I sat there until Caroline walked Emma outside. They got into a gray Subaru, the same one I'd seen on the toll pass report Marcus gave me. Emma climbed into her car seat, humming something. Caroline looked tired, but content. The kind of tired that comes from building something that feels safe. I waited until they drove off before getting out. I didn't touch anything, didn't ring any doorbells. I just took a photo of the mailbox with both their names on it. Pierce, divided by Hensley. That was enough. Back home that night, Evan called, saying he'd be late. I said, "Take your time." Then I printed the mailbox photo, slipped it into my folder, labeled Final Draft. By Sunday morning, my plan was airtight. Marcus would handle the tech side at the gala. I'd handle the delivery. I rehearsed my speech in front of the mirror while brushing my teeth, keeping it simple, sharp, factual. No screaming, no melodrama, just truth. Evan spent that Sunday cleaning his suit and polishing his acceptance speech. He asked if I'd sit at his table or near the front. Front, I said. I want the best view. He smiled, completely unaware of how accurate that statement was. The following days passed quietly. I kept my tone warm, my eyes soft, my voice calm. It's amazing how easy love can look when it's already dead. 2 nights before the gala, Evan looked up from his laptop and said, "You've been different lately. In a good way." "Yeah," I said. "I've just been clear." He kissed me goodnight, saying, "You're my clarity, you know that?" I smiled. "Oh, I do." When he fell asleep, I turned off the bedside lamp and stared into the dark, listening to his slow, steady breathing. I reached into the drawer, pulled out the photo of him holding Emma, and placed it on my nightstand. It wasn't anger keeping me awake anymore. It was anticipation, the kind that comes right before a truth finally breaks the surface. The morning of the gala, he was humming in the shower again, same tune as always. I made coffee, folded his pocket square, and handed him his tie. "You're going to have a big night," I said. He kissed me, grinning. "Couldn't have done it without you." He was right. He really couldn't have. The night of the gala, Chicago looked like it had dressed up for me. The skyline shimmered over the river, the streets slick from a light drizzle, traffic inching toward the hotels where everyone in the city wanted to be seen. I slipped into the dress I'd bought 2 weeks earlier, a sleek black number with an open back. Subtle, elegant, and sharp enough to slice through the room's self-importance. Evan whistled when he saw me. "Damn, Hannah, you're making the rest of us look bad." I smiled. "That's the plan." We took his Tesla downtown, him talking the whole way about his company, about the project in Madison, about the future. He had no idea how short his version of the future was. The ballroom at the Fairmont was everything you'd expect from a professional award ceremony. Chandeliers, champagne, over-polished egos. Men in tuxes shook hands like they were closing deals. Women in sequins laughed a little too loud. Evan fit right in, all charm and confidence, smiling at colleagues, hugging people he barely liked. I stayed close, playing my role, the supportive wife, the quiet half of the success story. Nobody suspects the woman standing right next to the bomb. Marcus was already there, disguised as event security, earpiece in, calm as ever. We didn't acknowledge each other, just a passing glance when he walked by. That was enough. Evan was ushered toward the stage area for pre-show photos. As he posed for pictures, I found our table. Name cards. Table 12. Front and center. Perfect view of the big projection screen. At exactly 7:15, I got a text from Marcus. Madison guests just checked in. My pulse quickened. I looked toward the entrance, and there she was. Caroline. She looked radiant, in a soft blue dress, holding little Emma's hand. The girl wore a purple ribbon in her hair. Of course she did. They stopped at the registration table, smiling politely as they were escorted in. Evan's co-workers nodded, assuming she was part of his team. Some even complimented her. Caroline had no idea what she was walking into. I caught Marcus's eye across the room. He gave a barely perceptible nod. Phase 2 was in motion. Evan came back to the table, his arm brushing mine. This turnout's insane. Half the firm's here. Looks that way, I said. My tone was neutral, measured, the voice of someone who'd stopped feeling panic days ago. The dinner began. Speeches, applause, forced laughter. Caroline sat 3 tables behind us, close enough for me to see her smile every time someone mentioned the Madison project. Emma colored quietly beside her with crayons the hotel must have provided. Every few minutes, Evan's eyes flicked toward the back of the room, like he felt something. Instinct, maybe. But he didn't turn far enough to see her. When dessert arrived, I reached for his hand. You nervous? He smiled. Only about my speech. You know I hate public speaking. You'll be fine, I said. You're good at building things. He laughed, unaware of how accurate that was. At 8:30, the lights dimmed for the award presentation. The host walked on stage, microphone in hand, talking about integrity in engineering and visionary leadership. The irony almost made me choke on my champagne. Then came the moment. This year's award for Outstanding Structural Design goes to Evan Pierce of Pierce and Langford Construction. Applause erupted. Evan stood, buttoned his jacket, kissed my cheek, and walked to the stage. Cameras flashed. He adjusted the microphone, cleared his throat, started thanking people. I watched him speak the polished voice, the confident posture. It was like watching a well-rehearsed commercial. When he said, "And most of all, I want to thank my wife, Hannah, for always believing in me," I saw Marcus move toward the tech booth, right on cue. The projector screen behind Evan flickered. The logo disappeared. Then a folder appeared, a familiar one. Evidence. The double life of Evan Pierce. The room went silent. Evan froze. The first photo appeared him and Caroline outside the Madison apartment, smiling. Then another him holding Emma. Then the bank statements, the tax records, the mailbox photo. The audience murmured, confusion turning into whispers, then gasps. Someone near the front dropped their fork. Evan turned, blinking at the screen like it was a hallucination. What is this? I stayed seated, sipping my drink. Caroline stood up from her table, confusion and shock mixing on her face. Evan, she said softly, loud enough that the room caught it. He turned toward her voice, and that's when it hit him. The color drained from his face completely. The child at her side looked up from her drawing and waved. Daddy! You could feel the air being sucked out of the ballroom. The host's microphone squealed with feedback. Evan stammered something, but his voice cracked. Caroline, I can explain. Caroline's hand went to her mouth as she processed the word wife, echoing in the whispers around her. You're married? She whispered. Evan stepped off the stage, walking toward her, his hands up, his face pale and sweating. It's not what you think. She laughed a short, broken sound. Not what I think? You said she left you. You said God. You said you were divorced. Emma clutched Caroline's arm. Mommy, why is Daddy upset? The crowd was dead silent. Phones were out now. People were recording. His boss looked horrified. The event coordinator was frozen mid-step. I stood up slowly, finally breaking the silence. He's upset because he just lost his biggest project, me. Evan turned toward me. His expression was somewhere between pleading and panic. Hannah, please. Not here. Where then? I asked calmly. In Madison? Or maybe at our accountant's office when the IRS sees those deductions? A murmur rippled through the audience. Evan's partner, Langford, stood up and hissed. You falsified filings on company records? Evan didn't answer. He just stood there, shaking, his career collapsing in real time. I walked toward him, heels clicking against the marble floor, the projector light glinting off the wine glass in my hand. You know, Evan, you always said honesty was the foundation of any good structure. I guess you forgot to build yours on it. He tried to speak, but nothing came out. Caroline grabbed Emma and stormed out, tears streaking her face. I set my glass on a nearby table and looked at the stunned crowd. Thank you all for coming. I think we can agree he's not the man of the year after all. And then I turned and walked away, leaving him standing under the bright white spotlight, surrounded by everything he'd built and destroyed. Outside, the drizzle had stopped. The night air was cool, sharp, honest. My car was waiting, engine running. Marcus leaned against it, hands in his pockets. He didn't ask how it went. He didn't have to. He just opened the door for me and said, "Hell of a show." I got in, closed the door, and exhaled. For the first time in years, I felt light. The kind of light that comes right after a storm breaks and everything ugly has finally been washed clean. By the time I got home that night, social media was already on fire. Someone had posted a short clip from the gala Evan's face projected on the big screen as the word evidence flashed behind him. I didn't share it, didn't like it, didn't even watch it twice. I didn't need to. I had seen the live version. The next morning, my phone started ringing before sunrise. Calls from coworkers, texts from friends, emails from reporters I didn't even know. Apparently, humiliation travels faster than honesty. Evan's name was trending locally, with headlines like Engineer of the Year, exposed at Gala and Double Life Shock Chicago's elite. He called at 7:12 a.m. I didn't answer. Then he texted, "Please, we need to talk. You don't understand what you've done." I stared at the message for a moment, then put my phone face down. I made coffee, sat at the kitchen counter, and looked around the house, the one I decorated, cleaned, and built memories in. Every object seemed to vibrate with a new meaning now. The dining chairs we'd bought together, the vase from our anniversary trip, the wedding photo I hadn't taken off the wall yet. When the doorbell rang, I knew it was him. Evan never knocked. He always rang once and waited, like the world owed him patience. He looked terrible. Dark circles, wrinkled shirt, hair a mess. His voice cracked when he said, "Can I come in?" "I don't think that's a good idea." "Hannah, please. I just need 5 minutes." I stepped aside, not because I forgave him, but because I wanted to see what a man looks like when everything he built finally caves in. He walked in slowly, scanning the living room like he was entering a crime scene, which, in a way, he was. "You destroyed me," he said quietly. I laughed. "No, Evan, you destroyed yourself. I just handed everyone the blueprints." He dropped his bag onto the floor and sank into the couch. "You could have talked to me first." "How dashed." "Oh, right. Because talking worked so well when you were lying about Madison for 6 years?" He rubbed his temples. "You don't get it. I didn't plan any of this. It just happened." I crossed my arms. Families don't just happen, Evan. They take effort, lies, and apparently a good accountant. He looked up, eyes red. "I love Emma. She's my daughter." I nodded. "And Caroline?" "I cared about her too. But I love you, Hannah. I always have." "Oh." I stared at him for a long time, wondering if he actually believed that. "You love me? You spent 6 years proving the opposite." He leaned forward. "I made mistakes." "No," I interrupted. "You made choices. Big difference." He fell silent. The kind of silence that fills a room so thick you can almost hear it breathing. After a moment, he whispered, "I've lost my job." I figured. "They suspended me this morning. Langford said the board's reviewing everything. The firm's reputation's shot. I'm probably done. That tends to happen when you commit tax fraud." He flinched. "You told the IRS?" "Not yet," I said, sipping my coffee. "But I will." He looked up, panic flickering across his face. "Please don't. They'll ruin me." I tilted my head. "You spent years ruining me, Evan. My peace, my trust, my finances. I think you'll survive a few audits." He stood abruptly, pacing. "You don't understand what that'll do to me." "Oh, I understand perfectly. That's why I'm doing it." He turned toward me, eyes desperate. "You're not like this, Hannah. You're kind. You're better than this." I met his gaze. "I used to be." He froze. I could tell that line landed. For years I'd been the calm one, the rational one, the one who believed people eventually do the right thing. But now, looking at him, I realized good people don't always get justice. They have to build it themselves. He grabbed his keys, muttering something about calling his lawyer, and stormed out. The door slammed so hard one of the picture frames fell off the wall. I didn't bother picking it up. For a moment, I just stood there, letting the silence settle again. It didn't feel lonely, it felt earned. By noon, my phone buzzed again. This time it was Marcus. "You okay?" "Better than expected," I said. He chuckled. "He looks worse than I've ever seen him." A colleague sent me a screenshot. Apparently his company's board met without him this morning. "Good," I said. "Less paperwork for me." That afternoon, I met with my lawyer, Marianne. She'd already drawn up the divorce papers. We sat across from each other in her office while she walked me through the details. "You'll keep the house," she said. "He forfeited claim by using joint funds for the Madison lease. That's technically marital waste." "Perfect," I said. She smiled. "You'll also be entitled to 50% of all liquid assets. I've frozen the joint accounts until settlement. He can't touch a cent." I felt an unfamiliar rush of satisfaction. Not joy exactly, but a quiet sense of balance. For years, he'd controlled the narrative. Now, it was mine. As I was leaving, Marianne said, "You did the right thing, you know." "I didn't do the right thing," I replied. "I did the necessary thing." When I got home, I finally took down the wedding photo. I didn't tear it or burn it. I just slid it into a drawer, face down. Some endings don't need flames, they just need closure. Later that evening, I poured a glass of wine and stepped out to the patio. The city skyline shimmered in the distance. My phone buzzed again, another text from Evan. "Please, can we talk? Just one last time. I'm sorry." I typed a response and deleted it 3 times before deciding on just 2 words. Not anymore. Then I turned off my phone. The night air was crisp, and for the first time in a long time, it didn't feel heavy. There were no more secrets left in the house, no more lies hovering over dinner tables. Just the sound of the wind through the trees and the faint hum of traffic below. It wasn't peace, not yet, but it was something close, something honest. 2 days after the gala, the world kept spinning, just not for Evan Pierce. His company issued a statement calling the situation deeply regrettable. His name disappeared from the firm's website before lunch. By evening, one of his partners had updated their LinkedIn profile to Acting Managing Director. That's corporate language for "we've already replaced him." Meanwhile, I was busy living like nothing happened. The trick to surviving a public scandal is simple. Act like it doesn't belong to you. Grocery stores, morning walks, coffee runs, people stared, whispered. I smiled back politely. It's amazing how quickly you become a legend in your own zip code once you humiliate a man at a 5-star hotel. My inbox was flooded. Strangers sent emails with subject lines like, "You're my hero," or "Teach me how to catch a liar." It was absurd. I hadn't done anything heroic, just refused to be the punchline. Marcus stopped by that afternoon. He leaned against my kitchen counter, sipping the coffee I handed him. "You know you broke the internet, right?" I shrugged. "About time I accomplished something viral." He chuckled. "The video hit 1 million views this morning. Someone tagged it Number Gallagate." I laughed, despite myself. "Of course they did." He watched me for a moment, his tone shifting. "You sure you're holding up?" "I'm fine. Really. Fine as in okay, or fine as in barely keeping it together?" "Fine as in done," I said. "With him, with all of it." He nodded. "Good. Just remember, he's not done trying. Guys like him never are." He was right. That night, Evan called again, not to apologize this time, but to negotiate. "We can fix this privately," he said. "You don't have to destroy my entire career." "You did that all by yourself," I said. He sighed heavily. "You're angry. I get it. But think about what you're doing. We can settle. No lawyers, no IRS. Just walk away." I paused, staring at the papers on my counter. "You had 6 years to choose settle. You chose secrets. Goodbye, Evan." I hung up. The next morning, my lawyer emailed saying the divorce papers had been served. It was official now. I wasn't Mrs. Pierce anymore, just Hannah Price, full stop. It felt cleaner than I expected. Later that day, I got a message from an unknown number. It was Caroline. I don't know what to say. I had no idea. I'm sorry you went through that. I stared at the text for a while before replying. You don't owe me an apology. He lied to both of us. She responded almost immediately. Emma keeps asking why her dad isn't coming back. What should I tell her? That one hit harder. I typed slowly. Tell her dad made mistakes. Big ones. But tell her it's not her fault. It never was. There was a long pause, then, thank you. That night, I poured a glass of wine and sat on the couch, thinking about Caroline and that little girl. It was strange I didn't feel hate, just exhaustion. Evan had managed to hurt everyone who cared about him, and he didn't even realize that was his real punishment. By Friday, the IRS had reached out. Marianne had filed the report as planned. The agent was polite, almost cheerful. We'll be reviewing Mr. Pierce's filings for the past 6 years. You may be contacted to verify joint signatures. Happy to help, I said. After the call, I laughed. There's something poetic about bureaucracy finally working in your favor. The next week was quiet. Evan moved out of his apartment and into a rental on the outskirts of Aurora. Marcus sent me a photo. It looked like a college dorm with beige walls and a folding chair for furniture. Fitting. The Chicago gossip cycle eventually moved on. Someone else's scandal took over the feeds. But in Madison, apparently, the fallout lingered. Caroline filed for child support through her lawyer, using evidence Marcus had gathered. She got full custody. I didn't interfere, didn't celebrate. Justice didn't need applause. One afternoon I met Patricia and Richard Evans' parents for lunch. They'd reached out, said they wanted to talk. I agreed, mostly out of curiosity. Patricia looked older, smaller somehow. We're ashamed, she said quietly. We raised him better than that. You raised a charming liar, I said. Don't take it personally. He fooled everyone. Richard nodded. We cut ties for now. He needs to learn what accountability feels like. Oh. They handed me a small envelope, a handwritten note, and a check. We wanted to help with your legal costs, Richard said. I pushed it back. Keep it. I don't need it. Just make sure Emma doesn't grow up thinking lying is normal. Patricia teared up. You're a stronger woman than I ever was. Not stronger, I said. Just finished pretending. That night, I drove to Lake Michigan, parked by the water, and sat on the hood of my car, watching the city lights reflect on the surface. I thought about everything that had happened, the lies, the betrayal, the revenge. It all looked smaller from a distance. I realized revenge doesn't erase pain. It just rearranges it into something you can live with. As I watched the waves hit the rocks, I finally deleted the last photo I had of Evan and me together. It didn't hurt like I thought it would. It just felt necessary. When I got home, I found a message waiting on my voicemail. It was Marcus. Just checking in. There's a journalist who wants to interview you for a podcast. I told them you'd think about it. I played the message twice, smiling faintly. The story had become entertainment now. Of course it had. That's what people do. They consume someone else's pain, like a bedtime story. I texted him back. No interviews. I'm not a headline. I'm just done. He replied with a thumbs-up emoji, which for Marcus was practically a speech. The next morning, I opened the windows wide, let the light in, and made breakfast for one. The house was quiet, peaceful, mine again. I didn't feel victorious, just steady like life had finally stopped spinning. When the doorbell rang, I didn't flinch this time. It wasn't Evan. It was the mailman, holding a thick envelope marked Pierce and Langford Construction Legal Notice. I signed for it, set it on the counter, and laughed under my breath. Whatever fresh chaos it contained, it wasn't mine to fix anymore. I tossed it in a drawer, poured myself another cup of coffee, and sat down by the window, watching the morning unfold, like it always does, indifferent, consistent, honest. 3 weeks after the gala, Evan's empire was officially gone. His name had been erased from every project he'd ever led. His firm had dissolved the partnership, and his professional license was now under ethics review. I didn't have to follow the updates they found me. Former coworkers emailed me articles like I'd been waiting for the news. I hadn't. Watching him fall wasn't satisfaction anymore. It was closure by repetition. He sent me one last text that week. "You win." I didn't reply. There was no game to win. Only lessons that cost too much to learn. The IRS case moved fast once the documents came through. My lawyer handled everything. I didn't have to show up to hearings or interviews, just sign my statements and wait. One agent even said, "You married a very creative man," in the tone people use when they find something both disgusting and impressive. The irony? Evan's so-called creativity was exactly what got him caught. He'd claimed the Madison condo as a business expense and Emma as a dependent while paying child support from the joint account. It was practically a self-authored confession. By July, the IRS had frozen most of his assets. Marcus texted me an update. "They're seizing the Tesla. He's driving a rental now. Beige Corolla. Ironic." I laughed out loud. There was poetic justice in seeing the man who once bragged about his precision-engineered life reduced to a rental with cloth seats. That weekend, I took a trip to Madison not for revenge, but for peace of mind. I wanted to see where the other half of my life had been spent without me. The city was smaller than I imagined, quieter. The apartment building still stood on the same corner. The mailbox names were gone, replaced by a single blank plate. Someone new had probably moved in. I sat in my car across the street, engine off, and watched for a while. I didn't cry. Not for the lost years, not for the betrayal. I just felt detached. Like I was finally watching the movie of my own life instead of starring in it. As I was leaving, I saw Caroline step out of a cafe with Emma. They didn't see me. Emma was laughing, holding an ice cream cone, her small hand tucked in her mother's. They looked happy, or at least trying to be. I stayed long enough to make sure they were okay. That was enough. Driving back to Chicago, I thought about how different betrayal feels once it stops burning. At first, it consumes everything: sleep, appetite, logic. But after a while, it cools. It turns into something sharper. You stop asking, "Why me?" and start asking, "What's next?" When I got home, my phone buzzed again, this time from Marianne. "It's official," she said. "The divorce is finalized." "That's it?" I asked. "That's it. You're free." Free. The word sounded strange, like it didn't belong to me yet. That night, I ordered takeout, turned on a movie, and opened a bottle of wine. No ceremony, no celebration, just quiet. Halfway through dinner, I looked around and realized there wasn't a single trace of him left in the house. His suits were gone, his shoes, his framed degrees, even the faint cologne smell had faded. Freedom didn't look dramatic. It looked like peace. A few days later, Patricia called again. She sounded tired but softer. "We saw Emma last weekend," she said. "Caroline let us take her to the park." "That's good," I said. "She's a sweet girl," Patricia continued. "I wish things had been different." "So do I." She hesitated before saying, "You know, I don't blame you for what happened at the gala." "I know," I said quietly. "He earned that moment all by himself." After we hung up, I went outside and sat on the porch steps, watching the sky shift colors. Chicago sunsets always look a little dramatic orange fading into purple, like the city's apologizing for the day. I thought about all the years I'd spent building a life that was half fiction. I used to believe betrayal was the end of everything. Turns out it's just the beginning of honesty. The following week, Marcus stopped by again. He leaned against my counter, same as always, holding 2 cups of coffee. "You're officially famous," he said. "Some podcast wants to do an episode about you. The wife who exposed the engineer." Catchy title. I groaned. "I'm not a headline." He grinned. "Too late. You're the face of poetic revenge now." I took a sip of my coffee. "You think I went too far?" Marcus shook his head. "No. I think you finished something he never expected you to start." For the first time since it all began, I laughed genuinely, no bitterness, no edge, just relief. A week later, I got an email from Caroline. "Emma started kindergarten today. She drew a picture of her family, me, her, and your dog. I guess she still remembers him. I hope you're doing okay." I smiled at that. I'd forgotten how forgiving children could be. They don't hold on to pain like adults do. They just outgrow it. I replied simply, "I'm doing fine. Tell her she's got talent." That evening, I took a long walk by the lake. The air was cool, the waves small, the world calm again. It struck me how unremarkable peace feels after chaos. You expect fireworks, but it's just stillness. When I got home, there was a letter waiting in the mailbox. From Evan, no return address, just my name in his handwriting. I almost threw it out, but curiosity won. Inside was a single line. I never meant to hurt you. I stared at it for a long minute, then folded it neatly and placed it in the trash. Intent doesn't erase impact. Later that night, I poured myself a drink and raised the glass not to him, not even to revenge, but to the version of me that survived him. The one that finally learned peace isn't the absence of betrayal, it's what comes after you stop needing answers. Some people build houses, others build lies. I just built a new life, one I didn't have to share with anyone who couldn't tell the truth. Mornings started to feel normal again. I'd wake up, make coffee, and actually taste it instead of just using it as fuel to survive another day. The air felt lighter in the house, like the walls had stopped holding their breath. I didn't jump when my phone buzzed anymore, didn't dread walking past the front door, and didn't spend my nights replaying arguments in my head. Freedom isn't dramatic. It's quiet. It's the sound of your own life getting back its rhythm. By late August, I'd gone back to work full-time. My coworkers treated me like some sort of local celebrity. One of them said, "You're like Aaron Brockovich, but with better heels." I laughed, but it wasn't pride, I felt it was distance. What happened to me had become a story for everyone else, but for me, it was still my life, still something I was learning to breathe through. Marcus dropped by the office one afternoon. He looked like he hadn't slept in 2 days, which, knowing him, was probably true. He handed me a manila folder. "Final report," he said. "Thought you'd want the last copy for your records." Ugh. Inside were the documents from the case, photos, statements, transaction histories, all the ugly proof that once kept me up at night. I stared at the folder for a second, then closed it. "You keep it," I said. "I don't need the receipts anymore." He smiled faintly. "That's how you know you're done." After he left, I went out for a walk. Chicago had just started slipping into early fall. The air had that crisp smell, apples, leaves, and the faint promise of change. I walked through Millennium Park and realized I hadn't done something simple and spontaneous like that in years. Evan never liked aimless walks. He said they were a waste of time. Funny how the best moments in life are usually the ones that don't make it onto a schedule. Later that week, Patricia invited me to brunch again. This time, I didn't hesitate. She greeted me with a hug that lingered a little longer than usual. "You look good," she said. "Like you finally exhaled." "I did," I said. Over eggs and coffee, she told me about seeing Emma again. "She's drawing everything these days. Houses, flowers, people. She drew one of you, actually." "Me?" I asked, surprised. Patricia nodded. "Caroline said she called you the lady who made the truth happen. Kids have strange ways of describing justice." I didn't know what to say to that. I just smiled, quietly grateful that somehow the smallest person involved in this mess came out with the most grace. When I got home, I finally cleared the last of Evan's things from the basement, his old boxes, books, and framed diplomas. I didn't burn them or break them. I just left them by the curb for pickup. That felt better than fire. It wasn't rage, it was release. Around mid-September, I met Marcus again for lunch. He ordered a burger, I got a salad, and he said, "So, what's next for you?" "Nothing dramatic," I said. "I think I just want to live small for a while. No more wars." He nodded. "Small's underrated." "Yeah," I said. "I'm starting to like it." He leaned back, smirking. "You know, most people would have gone nuclear. You went strategic. That's rare." "I didn't want to destroy him," I said. "I just wanted the truth to exist somewhere outside my head." That night, I started writing again, not about Evan, but about control, about how easy it is to lose it without noticing. I wrote for hours, not because I wanted to publish anything, but because it felt like vacuuming dust out of my own mind. Every now and then, Evan's name would still pop up in the news. Tax hearings, license suspension, lawsuits from former clients. His life had become a series of footnotes, each one worse than the last. I didn't gloat. I didn't even click. There's no point in rewatching someone else's downfall once you've already walked away from it. In early October, I visited Madison again. Caroline had sent an email saying Emma wanted to meet Miss Hannah. I hesitated for a day, then agreed. When I arrived, Emma ran up with that same boundless energy kids always have. She handed me a drawing. "That's you," she said proudly. "You're smiling now." It was messy, colorful, imperfect, and beautiful. I thanked her, then looked at Caroline, who seemed calmer than the last time I'd seen her. "She's doing better," I said. "She is," Caroline replied. "We both are." We sat outside the cafe, talking about ordinary things, schools, work, traffic, like two people who had nothing left to untangle. When I left, I hugged her. Not as a survivor to another, but as two women who finally stopped orbiting around the same man. Back in Chicago, I started redecorating. Not to erase the past, but to reclaim space. I painted the walls a deep navy blue, replaced the furniture, bought a new rug that didn't have a single shared memory attached to it. Every corner of the house slowly became a reflection of who I was, not who I'd been pretending to be. One night, while rearranging shelves, I found the last photo of Evan and me tucked between some books. We were smiling, arms around each other, pretending our world wasn't cracking beneath us. I studied it for a moment before putting it back, not in anger, just as a reminder of what silence costs. By winter, I was hosting small dinners again. Friends came over, filled the house with laughter, and spilled wine. No one whispered, no one walked on eggshells. The space that once held secrets now held noise, warmth, and people who actually told the truth. I realized that revenge hadn't made me powerful, clarity had. Knowing what was real and what wasn't, who I was and who I'd never be again. That night, I went to bed early, the city lights glowing through my curtains. For the first time in years, I didn't feel haunted. I felt whole. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise, made coffee, and watched the sky change colors over the lake. I thought about how much had been destroyed, how much had been rebuilt, and how sometimes, losing everything is just the blueprint for starting over this time, with no lies in the foundation. The thing about starting over is that nobody teaches you how quiet it is. You expect it to be dramatic: new job, new city, new love, but in reality, it's just small decisions that slowly rebuild a life. You stop buying coffee for two. You change the settings on your thermostat. You catch yourself laughing at something stupid on TV and realize you didn't have to force it. By November, I'd settled into a rhythm that didn't include Evan, or anger, or even Marcus checking in every other day. My mornings started with a jog by the lake, earbuds in, mind clear. The city had begun its slow drift into winter gray skies, scarves, and coffee shops fogged with steam. I loved it. Not because it was beautiful, but because it was ordinary. At work, my editor started giving me bigger projects again. He said, "You've got your edge back." I smiled, thinking, no, I just stopped wasting it on the wrong person. After the gala, a local nonprofit reached out. They'd seen the story and wanted me to help with a campaign about financial fraud awareness for women, teaching them how to spot signs of manipulation and economic abuse. I hesitated, but then agreed. It wasn't about Evan anymore. It was about turning my mess into something useful. The first meeting was in a small community center in Lincoln Park. A handful of women sat in folding chairs, notebooks in their laps, each one looking like she'd rather be anywhere else. I started by saying, "I'm not a financial expert. I just learned the hard way that love makes terrible accounting decisions." That broke the ice. They laughed softly at first, then freely. By the end of the session, one woman stayed behind. "You really exposed him at that gala?" she asked, half in awe, half in disbelief. "Yep," I said. "And no, I don't recommend it unless you've got solid evidence and a lawyer who doesn't flinch." She smiled. "You're braver than I could ever be." "F4." I shook my head. Not brave, just tired of being lied to. On the way home, I thought about that word brave. People keep using it like it's something noble. But bravery isn't loud. Sometimes it's just showing up when everything inside you says stay home. That night, Marcus called. "You actually did it," he said. "You turned a disaster into a TED Talk." "Don't tempt me," I said, laughing. He paused. You sound happy, Hannah. I think I am, I admitted. At least I'm not waiting for the next disaster anymore. He hummed in agreement. You planning on dating again? Eventually. Right now, I'm just dating my piece, and it's going well. He chuckled. Fair enough. Thanksgiving rolled around. Patricia invited me, and to my own surprise, I went. Caroline and Emma were there too. It was awkward for about 5 minutes until Emma ran up to me and handed me a crayon drawing of a turkey that looked more like a cactus. For you, she said proudly. Thank you, sweetheart, I said, kneeling to her height. It's perfect. Caroline smiled across the table. She talks about you a lot, says you're her friend. I'd like to be, I said honestly. Dinner was warm and unpretentious. No speeches, no tension, just mashed potatoes, laughter, and Emma insisting that cranberry sauce should be its own food group. Patricia looked at me at one point and said quietly, You know, if this is redemption, it's the quiet kind. I smiled. That's the only kind that lasts. When I left, Caroline hugged me. You didn't have to forgive me, she said softly. I didn't, I said. I just stopped blaming you for something you didn't do. Driving home, the streets shimmered with frost. I realized forgiveness isn't for the other person. It's what happens when you stop giving your past free rent in your head. By December, the nonprofit asked me to speak at a conference. The audience wasn't huge, maybe 50 people, but when I walked onto that stage, I didn't feel nervous. I talked about red flags in relationships that nobody warns you about. Financial secrecy, isolation, charm as a tool. I said, Betrayal isn't just about cheating. Sometimes it's about how easily someone can spend your trust like a credit card. Afterward, a young woman approached me, tears in her eyes. I'm leaving my husband tomorrow, she said quietly. I put a hand on her shoulder. Then tomorrow's the first honest day of your life. It hit me then how far I'd come from the woman who once sat in her car gripping a crayon drawing like a crime scene photo. I wasn't her anymore. I wasn't trying to make sense of his lies. I was building something new out of them. Later that month, Marcus and I met for drinks at a rooftop bar. The wind was brutal, but the view was incredible city lights reflecting off the frozen river. So, he said, raising his glass, if you had to sum it all up, what's the moral of the story? I thought about it for a moment. That revenge might feel good, but rebuilding feels better. He grinned. You're turning into a philosopher. Don't push it, I said, clinking my glass against his. When I got home, I stood in front of the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. Same face, same eyes, but everything behind them had changed. There was no trace of fear left, no trace of the woman who waited for apologies that would never come. I crawled into bed, the city quiet outside my window. The sheets were cold but clean, the kind of cold that reminds you you're alive and not waiting for anyone to warm it for you. As I drifted off, I thought about all the things Evan used to say, how he needed control, how he hated chaos, how he couldn't function without being the smartest man in the room. I smiled into the dark. Turns out, chaos isn't the enemy. It's just the first step of rebuilding if you know how to survive it. January came with its usual gray skies and false promises of self-improvement. I didn't make resolutions that year. I'd already rebuilt enough. What I wanted wasn't change, it was balance. The kind that doesn't come from a motivational quote, but from learning when to stop fighting with ghosts. Work was steady, predictable. My editor offered me a feature story about women starting over after divorce. It's your wheelhouse, he said with a grin. I rolled my eyes but accepted. Maybe it was time to put something honest into print, something beyond scandal, beyond headlines. I spent weeks interviewing women whose lives had cracked open and rebuilt themselves differently. A teacher who moved across the country after catching her husband with her sister. A nurse who started a bakery after leaving a 20-year marriage. Every single one said the same thing in different words. It didn't kill me. It just burned off the parts I didn't need. When I finished the piece, I titled it, Blueprint for a New Life. My editor loved it. Readers did too. It wasn't dramatic, it was just true. One afternoon, while I was out for coffee, I bumped into someone I hadn't seen in ages, Rachel, an old college friend. She looked surprised to see me. Hannah, wow, It's been forever. How are you? Alive, I said, smiling. That's a start. We sat for an hour, talking about everything from work to relationships. When I told her what had happened with Evan, her jaw dropped. I saw that video online months ago. I had no idea that was you. Yeah, I said, stirring my coffee. Not exactly my favorite claim to fame. She laughed. Well, if it helps, you handled it better than 99% of people would. I shrugged. I didn't handle it. I just stopped running from it. As we parted ways, she hugged me tightly and said, "You're stronger than I remember." I smiled. That's because now I remember myself. That night, I came home to find a letter in the mail, this one from the IRS, but for once, it wasn't bad news. The investigation was closed. Evan had reached a settlement and was officially barred from holding financial authority at any company for 10 years. I laughed out loud. It wasn't joy. Exactly, it was relief dressed as irony. I poured a glass of wine and toasted the universe for finally balancing its books. Around mid-February, I got a call from Marcus. "Guess who I ran into?" he said. "Let me guess, Evan, working part-time at a tax seminar?" He chuckled. "Close. He's consulting for some small firm in Milwaukee. Word is, they don't know the whole story." "Then they'll learn," I said, taking a sip. "You want me to send them the file?" I paused, then said, "No. Let him figure out what accountability feels like when no one's watching." Marcus was quiet for a second. "You've changed." "I hope so." The next weekend, I visited Caroline and Emma again. Madison was covered in snow this time, the kind that muffles everything. Emma ran to greet me, waving a drawing she'd made. It was a big house, 2 stick figures holding hands, and a sun that took up half the page. "That's you and Mommy," she said proudly. Caroline laughed. "She insists you're part of the family." I smiled. That's the nicest thing anyone said all year. Over dinner, Caroline told me she'd started therapy. "It's helping," she said. "Not just for me, but for Emma, too. She's learning that her dad's mistakes don't define her." I nodded. "That's the hardest part, isn't it? Teaching yourself that someone else's choices aren't your fault." Exactly. We clinked glasses, not to celebrate survival, but to acknowledge it. On the drive home, I thought about how strange it was that pain had introduced me to people I actually liked. Caroline, Marcus, even Patricia, they were all part of the wreckage, yet somehow they'd become part of the recovery. Spring crept in slowly, like the city didn't trust it yet. I started taking weekend trips Milwaukee, Indianapolis, sometimes just small towns with decent diners. I'd sit by a window, order pancakes, and write. No deadlines, no editors, no point other than peace. One morning, while flipping through my notebook, I found a list I'd written years ago, things I want before 40. It included things like buy a vacation house, visit Italy, host a Christmas party. None of them mattered anymore. I scratched the whole list out and wrote one new line underneath. Never let someone else decide what peace should look like. A week later, Marcus stopped by unannounced. He dropped a bag of groceries on my counter. "You're out of coffee," he said, like it was a crime. "You're observant," I said. "I'm a detective. Comes with the job." We cooked dinner together, and for once we didn't talk about Evan or the past. We talked about small things, movies, terrible dating apps, how Chicago drivers get worse after the first snow. At one point, he looked at me and said, "You ever think about what's next?" "I stopped planning next," I said. "Now I just do now." He smiled. "That's probably why you look like you finally slept through the night." I laughed. "That's because I did." When he left, he said, "You know, not everyone gets to rebuild their life and make it better than before." "Maybe not," I said. "But everyone gets the choice to stop building on broken ground." That night, I stood at my window again, watching snowflakes drift under the streetlights. I thought about how far I'd come from the woman who once found a child's drawing in her husband's car. That moment used to define me. Now it was just a story, a strange, painful chapter in a book I no longer needed to reread. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm, stretched, and made coffee. The smell filled the kitchen, warm and familiar. For once, I didn't think about the past or the people who broke it. I just thought about how good it felt to be present, grounded, and most importantly, free. By early March, life had found a rhythm that didn't depend on anyone's approval. The kind of rhythm that doesn't feel like starting over, it just feels like living. I woke up without dread, worked without pretending, and came home to silence that finally sounded peaceful instead of empty. My mornings were predictable in the best way. I'd jog by the lake, feed the neighbor's cat when they were away, and read the news over coffee. It was boring, ordinary, and absolutely perfect. There was no drama, no chaos, no wondering where someone was or who they were with. The absence of lies has a strange kind of beauty. Nothing hidden, nothing to decode. One afternoon, I stopped by the library. The librarian, an older woman with silver hair and a Chicago accent thick enough to slice bread, looked at me and said, "You're that woman from the video, right? The gala?" I smiled politely. "That was a long time ago." She winked. "Well, honey, whatever you did, it worked. My ex still can't look at me without sweating." I laughed all the way home. Maybe healing wasn't about forgetting, it was about reclaiming the humor in what used to hurt. Marcus called that night. He said, "So, you ready to stop hiding yet? We're throwing a little dinner thing this weekend. Come out." "I'm not hiding," I said. "Then prove it. Show up." So I did. Saturday night, I walked into his place, a cozy loft that smelled like bourbon and wood polish. The crowd was small, his sister, a few friends, people who didn't know my story or care about it. When Marcus introduced me, no one whispered or stared. I wasn't that woman from the video anymore. I was just Hannah. At some point, someone handed me a glass of wine, and Marcus leaned over. "See? No ghosts here." I smiled. "Feels good." He raised his glass. "To ghosts that finally stop haunting." We clinked glasses, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I let myself laugh without checking if it sounded too loud. A few days later, I got a letter from Caroline. Inside was a small drawing from Emma, a house with a sun, 2 stick figures, and the words, "Thank you, Miss Hannah." I stuck it on my fridge, right next to a postcard from a friend that said, "Keep your chin up, your crown straight." Sometimes healing doesn't arrive as a big moment. Sometimes it's just a crayon drawing on a refrigerator door, reminding you that your story didn't end in disaster, it evolved. April came fast, and with it, an invitation. The nonprofit I'd helped with wanted me to host a panel on rebuilding after betrayal. My first instinct was to decline, but then I thought about those women who had shown up to that small meeting months ago, sitting in folding chairs with broken confidence and shaky hope. So I said yes. The event was in a modest community hall. Nothing fancy, no chandeliers, no champagne, just truth and second chances. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't talk about Evan, or revenge, or even betrayal. I talked about after. About how nobody tells you what comes next once the storm passes. How it's quieter, slower, but more honest. I said, "Everyone thinks revenge is the finish line, but it's not. It's just the moment you finally stop running in circles. The real victory is what you build after everything breaks." The applause felt genuine, not polite. Afterward, one of the attendees, a woman about my age, came up and said, "Your story made me leave last month. I'm sleeping better now." Alluve. I smiled. "Good. That's where freedom starts, in a full night's sleep." Driving home that night, the city lights blurred through the windshield, soft and golden. For once, I wasn't replaying old memories or reimagining confrontations. I was just present, watching the traffic lights change and thinking, this is what moving on feels like. The next week, I met Patricia and Richard again. We had dinner at a small Italian place downtown. They told me Evan had moved to Milwaukee permanently, trying to start a consulting firm. Richard shook his head. "He's still trying to rebuild without changing the foundation." I smiled faintly. "Some people don't learn until the roof collapses again." Patricia reached across the table, her hand warm on mine. "You gave us our granddaughter back. We'll never forget that." "You don't owe me anything," I said. "Just make sure she grows up to know what honesty looks like." Hib 0. That night, as I walked back to my car, I realized something important. I didn't need closure from Evan anymore. I didn't even need him to apologize. The story had already closed itself when I stopped participating in it. In May, The first signs of summer started showing up: green leaves, busier sidewalks, kids playing outside again. I sat on my porch one evening, sipping iced tea, and realized I hadn't thought about him in days. Not out of repression, but because he simply didn't matter anymore. Marcus stopped by, dropping off a file he'd promised to shred months ago. "Last piece of evidence," he said. "Want to burn it for fun?" I laughed. "No need. I'm not wasting matches on memories." He grinned. "You're officially free then." I was free the moment I stopped needing proof. Later that night, I found myself standing in front of the mirror again. Same reflection, but this time it wasn't about who I used to be. It was about who I was now. The woman staring back wasn't angry or broken or waiting for justice. She was simply alive. The kind of alive that doesn't demand applause, doesn't chase validation, just steady, honest, grounded. I turned off the light, crawled into bed, and listened to the soft hum of the city outside my window. The same city, where everything had once fallen apart now, held the quiet proof that life keeps going, and sometimes it gets better in the most ordinary way possible. By the time summer arrived, the story that once consumed my life had turned into something else entirely: background noise. People still recognized me sometimes, usually older women in grocery lines who'd whisper, "You're that woman from the gala, right?" I'd nod politely, smile, and move on. Fame fades fast when it's built on someone else's scandal, and I was more than fine with that. I'd started teaching a small writing workshop on weekends: real stories, real voices. The room was always full of people who wanted to tell their truths but didn't know where to start. I'd tell them, "You don't have to make it sound perfect. You just have to make it sound real." Maybe that was my entire philosophy now. My students would ask, "How do you know when you've healed?" I always said, "When your story stops needing an audience." The class became a little community. There was laughter, a few tears, and coffee that always tasted slightly burnt. But every week, someone told a truth they'd been holding for too long, and watching that, I realized how far I'd come. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was helping others find their own way out of the wreckage. One Saturday after class, Marcus dropped by with his usual mix of sarcasm and snacks. "I can't believe you're voluntarily spending weekends with strangers," he said, opening a bag of chips. "They're not strangers," I said. "They're storytellers. Same thing, just without the therapy bills." He grinned. "You ever think about turning this into something bigger? Like a podcast or a book?" I shook my head. "No, I'm done living life for the audience. This is just for me." Huh. He studied me for a moment, then said, "You know, you're the calmest person I've ever met who's burned down a man's reputation in public." I smirked. Maybe that's because I rebuilt something better in its place. That night, I cooked dinner for myself, nothing fancy, just pasta and wine, and sat out on the porch. The neighborhood was alive with summer sounds. Sprinklers hissing, a kid riding his bike too fast, someone grilling 2 houses down. It felt like a soundtrack to normal life, the kind I'd once thought I'd never have again. As I ate, I thought about everything that had happened: the discovery, the lies, the chaos, the revenge, and everything that followed. The thing about betrayal is that it doesn't kill you. It just forces you to rebuild your sense of self from the ground up. Every scar becomes a blueprint for something stronger. A week later, I met Caroline and Emma again. We met halfway between Madison and Chicago, at a little diner off the highway. Emma had grown taller, her hair longer, her laugh just as bright. She slid into the booth next to me and handed me another drawing, this one of 3 stick figures standing under a rainbow. "That's you," she said proudly, pointing to the one in the middle. "You're holding hands with me and Mommy." Caroline smiled. "She still talks about you like you're her superhero." I laughed softly. "I'm nobody's superhero. I just told the truth." "Yeah," Caroline said, "but sometimes that's the bravest thing anyone can do." We ate pancakes, talked about work and life, and avoided saying his name. There was no need to. He was just a shared shadow we'd both outgrown. When I got home that evening, I found a small box on my porch. No return address, just my name scrawled on the top. Inside was a cheap silver bracelet, the same one Evan had given me years ago for our 10th anniversary, the one I'd left behind when he moved out. There was a note. "I found this in storage. Thought you might want it back. Take care." I held it for a moment, then set it on the counter. I didn't feel anger or nostalgia, just a quiet kind of closure. He was trying to rewrite the ending, but I'd already written mine. I walked outside, bracelet in hand, and dropped it into the trash bin by the curb. For once, it didn't feel symbolic, it just felt finished. The next morning, I woke up early, packed a small bag, and drove out to the countryside. No destination, no GPS. Just miles of open road and quiet space to think. I stopped at a small roadside cafe where the waitress called everyone "hone" and poured coffee like she was fueling a race car. I sat there for an hour, watching sunlight spill across the cornfields, and realized I hadn't felt lonely once. Later that afternoon, I drove past a sign that read Lake Geneva, 5 miles. I parked by the water, took off my shoes, and stood in the shallow waves. The lake was calm, the air smelled like summer rain, and for the first time in years, I felt completely weightless. Freedom, I realized, isn't loud. It's not fireworks or revenge speeches. It's a quiet Saturday afternoon when no one is lying to you, not even yourself. Back in Chicago, my life kept moving. Work, friends, weekend trips, laughter, the ordinary things that make a life whole. Sometimes people still asked, "Do you ever think about him?" And I'd tell them the truth. Only when I need to remind myself what I won't tolerate again. As June faded into July, I hosted a small dinner for my students. We ate outside, candles flickering, music low. One of them asked, "So what do we call this chapter of your life?" I thought for a second and said, "Peace. Just peace." After they left, I sat alone for a while, watching the city lights blink through the trees. The same skyline that had once been a backdrop to heartbreak now felt like home again. I didn't need revenge anymore. I didn't need closure or forgiveness. I just needed this quiet, steady peace built on the ruins of what once hurt me. And as the night breeze drifted through the open window, carrying the faint sound of laughter from down the block, I finally understood that the best revenge isn't destruction. It's rebuilding so completely that the past doesn't even recognize you anymore. If you love family revenge stories, and emotional family drama that show how strength is born from pain, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Drop a comment below and tell me what part of this story hit you the hardest. I read every single one.